on behalf of VSG-AT and all the great folks we're proud to be associated with, just as a quick way of background, this series of webinars started some, I guess, 9 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago, when Russ and I were having a conversation about what could we do to try and add some value in whatever way, small or whatever it might be, that would not be commercial, would be free. And we just wanted to find a way to be helpful if we could to our industry. And so we came up with a webinar idea. Believe it or not, this is our 6th webinar. Interestingly, today's topic was selected 9 weeks ago, long before we knew of the light being shined on what's clearly some horrendous situations we deal with in our country and have for long before I was born. So we're going to, I'm sure, get a chance to talk today some about that and hear from some people that have great insights, and hopefully the dialogue and listening to one another helps us all to become more clear on ways that we can move forward. But truly the intent Russ and I had when we started this out was to create a dialogue and interaction within our industry in particular that would be helpful to people in this time where the pandemic had slowed things down. So I do want to just quickly take a moment here and introduce our panel today, for none of us is as smart as all of us. All 4 of these individuals are industry icons. You'll hear from Antony Bonavita shortly, from the great city of Cleveland and Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. Adina, Erwin, who's been a longtime industry leader, is now in the senior leadership roles with the International Association of Venue Managers, which has been a partner for us throughout this as well. By the way, will be joining us with her great insights and for many, many years at the fabulous Fox and Atlanta, and also her sojourn to Boston right before this started. Lee Zeidman was scheduled to be with us. He is not going to be with us today because with this evolving situation, as we all are aware, he's been called into all hands on deck call with city leadership and the LA governmental leadership this morning at 8. So he was not able to join us and sends his regrets and has committed that he'll come back. And of course, Russ Simons, who's the founder and chief listening officer for Venue Solutions Group, which has been iconic in our industry, period. So that's our panel. We'll get to them shortly. I did want to just take a moment. I had a conversation yesterday with a longtime friend of mine, Cameron Durham, who's at SoFi Stadium, and we were just chatting about the current situation. And I was asking Cam, coming into today's webinar, I'm a privileged white guy. I don't really know where to come from in this, except that I hurt and I see it and I recognize it and I feel like I do the best I can, but clearly it's not enough. So what do you recommend as we think about this? And Cam said, well, his reality is simply this, that people don't listen to each other. Whether they ever did, they clearly don't now. In this day of social media and quick to respond, and so many of us using actual social media as our way to show we care as opposed to physically going and doing something. He said, people talk over each other. They're already thinking about their response. And he said, if there was one thing we could do that could make this actionable, it would be to stop judging each other and just listen and have a dialogue. We can agree to disagree, but if we have a dialogue with one another. And so it reminded me of something we've shared in an earlier webinar, and then we'll quickly get to our panel. But it was really on my heart to share this as we set up today. And again, I want to remind you, this was initially set up as preparing us to get back to the workplace. And it still completely is. But the dynamics clearly from 8 days ago that shone such a bright light on a different kind of pandemic that exists not only in our country, but throughout the world. It has been going on, again, as I said earlier, long before I was born. But it's an opportunity now for us to listen to one another. And I thought about what we've shared in an earlier process together, and it was really this judging to valuing ladder. And typically what happens in my training and in the facilitation we do through VSG-AT is when we meet somebody or when we're in a situation, we already come into it with our bias, our way we see the world, our prejudices, our focuses. We all have them. And that's the biggest challenge all of us have is Russ likes to say, checking our ego at the door and thinking about where we're coming from. So judging is where this starts, and we begin to judge one another right away, and we're speaking over them, and we're not really hearing other people's perspective. We already know what the outcome is, even though we don't know the facts. But if we seek to understand through this listening, as Cam was saying yesterday, what if people would just take a step back and listen and seek to understand and try to respect one another's position, realizing we're all humans. We all have the same arms and legs and eyes and ears and brains, given the gifts of the world. And we all strive and desire and hope to feel love and be connected to one another in a heartfelt way. What if we could appreciate the fact that we are different, but that we bring different things to the table? And for those that were on a couple of weeks ago with Dina Crowder, she gave a fabulous interaction about don't do me any favors. This was really about valuing the differences, not only just in color and gender and sexual orientation, but in every aspect, that when we allow this full range of motion to enter into conversation, we end up with much better decisions and much more successful businesses. And ultimately, the goal is that we value the fact that we bring these different things to the table and with our hearts, rather than what we had formed into our mind. Nobody was born with hate. We learned it because of things we learned as kids, and it's passed on. So that's just as a precursor in terms of kind of where we're going today. And I want to now turn it over to our great friend from Cleveland, Antony Bonavita, who will take the first session here and just kind of talk a little bit about his perspective in terms of getting us ready to come back to the workplace and also our current situations in the world. AB?
Thank you, Rich. Good morning, everybody. We had a whole deck, and I apologize to my assistant Lisa, who helped put it together. Whole deck, surrounding teamwork and how none of us is as smart as all of us. And really, what we were going to talk about was hiring people, and I think it's still relevant. But we're going to talk about how we have a really poor individual in our organization that is just the world's worst hirer, and that's me. I am the world's worst hirer. I get emotional. I'm too emotional about it. So I surround myself with a group of people normally whenever I go out to hire someone to make sure that I'm thinking about it, in all ways. And I would say that the lessons that I've learned are really, it's about the right people, about literally getting in and understanding who the people are that you're hiring, because they're ultimately, that really is how cultures and organizations are created and sustained. So getting the meat of that, understanding the values, the morals, whether they're a cultural fit, somebody may have all the values and morals you're looking for, but not be a cultural fit. But more importantly, try to be good people. Now, I'm understanding that you have to hire people for skill sets. I would just say that if you can, is when you have the skill sets aligned, really try to get in and dig in to see whether they're good people. How do you do that? Look, the world has given us a lot more platform now than it ever did before. People will reveal themselves all the time through social media, through their interactions on social media. So obviously, just paying attention, not asking you to stalk or go into things that would get us in trouble, but ultimately just trying to get a sense for who the person is. People tend to reveal themselves even in conversation. But I want to put that aside because when talking to RA and Russ as we led into this today, I think the state of the world and where we are today is just too important for us to just continue the conversation as we had planned. So I want to talk a little bit about how I think teamwork is still a very valuable lesson for the day, but really how it relates to our ability to work with people of different race and specifically race in this instance. And it really comes down to us understanding that we're all implicitly biased, right? What is implicit bias? It means that we learn the certain social conditions, and we have certain behaviors that we learn in our environment, and we make decisions about people based off of that. Doesn't necessarily mean you're racist. It just means that you don't know sometimes. And a lot of things that I've heard over the last number of days is about people not knowing and understanding because they're not raised in an environment that provides them the opportunity to really understand other people. It's unconscious in a lot of ways, and actually in all the ways. And I think you'd be surprised how it comes out. It comes out in our schools. It comes out in our workplace. And it comes out in our legal system, primarily, where there's a implicit bias about certain defendants and people. And with that, I want to share a story. I'm very proud of the Cavaliers organization and the way we responded to the world as it started to evolve last week. We did not put our head in the sand. We got our team members together. We had a conversation. And in that conversation, one of our team members who works on our security team on the Cavs side, he gets to travel with the players. He was a 25-year veteran of a state police department. And he shared a story, and he's African American, and he shared a story that one day they were out on patrol and he had a white partner, and they were just driving around, and this is obviously years ago, and they pull over a group of kids, white kids, drinking underage, beer in the car, the whole deal. And what he taught us was that in a police, when you're a police officer, the guy driving or the person driving is typically in charge and has authority to say whether they're going to, let the person go or actually charge them. And then the partner writes the information and they have a tag team. So teamwork right there. But Rod was the gentleman's name, and he was driving. He's, like I said, he's the African American officer. And they talked to the kids. The kids were respectful. The kids weren't, they understood that they had screwed up. So they went back to the car and had a discussion. And Rod said, "Look, we'll just call the parents and we'll give them a kick in the butt and we'll let them go on their way and we'll go from there." And so they did that, and that's exactly what happened. And they didn't, and nothing else, happened from that. Fast forward 6 months later, the same situation, except his partner's the driver and Rod's in the passenger seat, and they pull over a group of African American kids. Basically the same situation, underage drinking, just being kids. And they get back to the car, and the partner asked for a specific piece of paper so he could fill out a juvenile, basically an arrest form for juveniles. And Rod said, "Well, what do you mean? Like, why are you going to put these guys in the system?" So they're drinking in the car, they're doing this, they're doing that. And Rod said, I got to ask you, like, we just had the same situation 4 months ago, and yet we let those kids go, and now you want to put these kids through the system. And his partner took a step back and was completely embarrassed and didn't realize what he was doing. Didn't realize how he was just making a judgment call based off his social and his implicit bias towards the situation. And they obviously, let the kids go. And from there, his partner, had a good conversation with Rod about, I need to get better and I need to understand when I'm going to make those type of decisions. And I thought that was relevant. And I think that's important for all of us. We all make decisions, implicit bias decisions every single day. I think surrounding ourselves with a diverse culture of people, understanding that we're all different, and having people around us who are confident and comfortable enough to tell us when we're wrong and when we're making a decision is paramount for our ability to move this country forward. I've reacted wrongly. You've reacted wrongly. We've made bad judgments about people. It's in our nature. But that's why diversity is what makes us strong, not what makes us weak. And I implore us to get better at that every single day. And I just want to share that, as the days go on here, I'm hopeful that we see a real change here, that this is finally the straw that broke the camel's back in a lot of ways, and that we get to see sustained change and not just another black box on Facebook, that we really commit to learning and growing and getting better and creating a better world for everyone. How do we do that? We do that by listening, as I think Richard said earlier. We do that by educating ourselves. We educate about each other and I promise you, all your coworkers, and I've worked here 10 years and I learned a lot about people that I never knew before. And I think, as you really start to peel back and understand, you really there's a lot of links that bind us, probably more so than divide us. And I think as you open that up and you dig in, you'll know that. We got to educate ourselves. We got to defend people who can't defend themselves. Enough is enough. I understand that we have to toe a line. I understand that there's, when you work for an organization like I do, that I have to be careful about what I put out social media wise. But damn it, enough is enough. And we got to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves or not being heard. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll pass it off, is we got to vote. I don't care which way you vote, but if you don't vote, you're part of the problem. And we got to get out there. We got to vote. We got to force change in this country. Again, as we march towards the elections in November, I would just encourage you all to do that. And with that, I hope some of what I said resonates, and that you take that with you and understand that we have a responsibility to make this world better for ourselves and for our children and the future generations.
Great. Thanks so much, Anthony. Adina, we're going to kick it over to you now.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. And thank you, Anthony, for leading in and talking about, what's going on with our country right now. This 2020 has started off in a very interesting way, and I think that's putting it mildly. Hopefully the next 6 months, the back half of 2020 looks very different. But I think I was talking to Richard yesterday in preparation for this call today, and he was asking, how do we take this none of us as smart as all of us, and really think about how it applies to the protest and the visceral emotion that we're feeling right now in this country. And I was telling him that I thought that none of us is as smart as all of us is part of, I think, a family of collective thought. The collective thought being that no one can do this on their own. It comes from a place of, where a lot of things that we hear a lot of, like the power of we. And I told him about a quote that I found about Ben Franklin. It says justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. And that, again, too, is about collective thought and collective involvement. And so none of us is as smart as all of us taps into all of that, because we're not going to be able to have any type of sustained impact change to the things that are bothering us right now in this country, unless we all pull together and figure it out. And whatever we figure out, whatever statements we're making, whatever stances we're making are actionable. What's next after you put that nice statement up on your website about human rights and how your organization is against racism? What happens after that? So these things have to be actionable. But as far as the workplace is concerned, none of us as smart as all of us, and but that has shown so much for me, and I've learned so many lessons has actually been in the hiring process, and that's probably where I made a lot of my mistakes, quite honestly. Most important job, I think, of someone in organizations in a leadership position is to support the team. That's job one, and that shows up in various ways. That shows up in, of course, how you compensate people. It shows up in professional development and in coaching, but it shows up in how we set examples, how we show up as leaders, and how we consistently show up as leaders. And so I've had a situation that happened when I worked at the Fox Theater that I think back on, in which I had a decision to make about hiring. And it was during a time when we needed to hire this position. It was a top level director position, a lot of influence in the organization, a lot of impact in the organization, and the position had gone through changes throughout a course of a year. So there have been different people in the position, a lot of transition in the position, and quite honestly, the team at Fox had grown very fatigued, going through these different changes, these different people, just trying to find the right fit. And we were about to head into the thick of our event schedule as well, and this position was vacant. So not only had the team gone through a lot of changes with the position was vacant, and we needed someone in the position to really help as we, really got into the thick of our season. So I felt the pressure to act quickly, and outside of how I would normally go about trying to find someone to join the family. And so normally I would have involved various team members in the interview process, because I look at it as like joining a family. It's like, it's important. We spend so many hours together on our jobs that we really need to make sure we've got the right people at the table, the right people on the bus, and the right seats on the bus. And so we needed to I used to do that to make sure that we had identified candidates that had values and approach to acclimation that aligned with our organization and how we looked in the way. The best way to do that is through kind of the none of us as smart as all of us approach, because you get more perspectives, you get more thoughts, to the table as you're looking at different candidates and people, and you get a better result. You get a lasting result. And so I abandoned all of that because I felt the pressure of needing to hire and move quickly. And I identified candidates, I interviewed candidates, and I made a hiring decision in isolation, all by myself. It was absolutely disastrous. It was the wrong decision all the way around. I thought that by doing this, it would speed things up. I thought it would also actually help support my team, because it would take the load off of my team of having to have one more thing to do to, be involved in this hiring process and interview people and go through the processes that we normally did. But that was absolutely not the case. We took 10 steps back. So already a team that was fatigued, and just emotionally spent as it pertained to this position and the load that they had to carry, with the position being vacant or people not being in the position. We still didn't have the right person in the position. So I failed the team. I didn't go about it the right way, because I didn't involve a collaborative approach to trying to identify the right fit. So result, it cost us money, because it costs a lot more money to move someone out of your organization that's not right than it is to find the right person. It costs us time, lost a lot of time trying to work with the candidate that was chosen to hopefully bring them along, but never really getting there. I lost the trust of my team, and I always say, you gain trust in drops, but you lose it in buckets. So once you lose it, it's oftentimes takes a lot of time to get it back. So trust in my leadership and decision making was in question, quite honestly. Motivation was decreased. People were tired, and a lot of emotional spend, a lot of time spent just trying to work around this decision that I made. So that was my biggest, and has been my biggest, I think, takeaway from the none of us is as smart as all of us. I understand that in many cases when you're hiring, you can involve your team in many ways because of the sensitivity of the position, or whatever the environment may be around hiring that position. But whenever you can, this none of us is as smart as all of us thought process and approach applies very well to hiring, because that way you make sure you're hiring the right person that's going to be a part of your family, that's going to be able to bring the right food for thought to the table, and help to advance the organization in the direction that you're going in. And so taking that extra time, that extra beat to determine how you can involve other people in the process is worth it, time and time again. So that's my takeaway for none of us as smart as all of us. It's shown up so many times in other aspects of the business for me, but that's definitely where I've learned my hardest lessons. So thank you, everyone.
Great. Adina, thanks so much. Brilliant. Really appreciate it. We'll ask Russ to come forward and share some wisdom as well. Thanks, Russ.
It's an interesting situation. We called this a webinar and we put a name on it, but it is a lot more like a conversation. In fact, all of your presenters here are regularly in conversations with each other. And I'm tempted to go down the hiring process because I very much agree with and support my colleagues. I'll give you a little short piece of insight. When I interview, which I do a lot, someone will bring me their resume and it's nice, and I turn it over and I put it upside down on the table. And I tell them, I want to hear about you. I want to know where you grew up. I want to know what you did in high school. Did you work in high school? Did you play sports? Were you parts of clubs or theater? What did you do in college? what I really want to know is, what is the content of your character? What is it that I can expect from you? How did you use your time? I'm not against video games, but if that's what you did, then that might limit what I feel like the capability is for you to contribute to our team. So at the end of those conversations, I'm more deeply interested in what the content of a person's character is and what I think we can count from them, particularly in difficult situations. Also, with regard to hiring, I always include people who are not in that individual's chain of command. And it doesn't matter where they are in the process, meaning it doesn't have to be just senior executives. Having middle managers or even line staff be a part of this interview process. These are people who are going to have to work together. This person's individual character is going to have to fit into culture. And I've heard that. I heard that earlier. Taking an extra step, it does two things. One is it makes sure that you're not just believing what you think. And from the perspective of none of us is as smart of all of us, the biggest challenge we have is believing that we're right, because then all of a sudden we're closed off to all other viewpoints. And I'm going to expand on that in a second. But really making sure that you have some balance, and because the conversation between other people might reveal things about that person and their background that are both positive, and other things that may require you to look a little more deeply. So this is basically saying we're going to set the foundation so that anybody in the organization can contribute to our potential success going forward. And the way this also turns about is, for instance, like right now I'm at SoFi Stadium, and we're starting up a massive new NFL stadium with 2 teams. So we're developing a lot of standard operating procedures. So one of the things in the departments that report to me is that when, in their SOPs, they have to have somebody from another department actually help to review those, so that because we all get so caught up in like sort of what we know and the vernacular of what we say and what we think it means, but we have to remember that there is a diverse audience who is going to be getting exposed to this, and if we don't actually take that extra step to ensure that we're getting that third set of eyes, that we're getting a fresh set of eyes, then if you're like me, as I was early in my career, I started the day believing I was correct. Now, on this call is Sydney Greenblatt, and I couldn't be more grateful to have a public opportunity to say thank you, because every morning Sydney woke up thinking, I have to make sure Russ knows he's not right. All right, and God bless you for having the energy to stay with me on that, because having a strong female leader like Sydney set the stage for my professional career meant that in every organization that I was a part of building after that, I had strong female leadership. And what it told me is that the worst thing that can happen is me today thinking I'm right? Because it tends to close off your willingness to look at other opportunities. Another example I'll give you is, again, here we have exterior plazas, and I had a vision for how those plazas should operate. And so we're going through this with security and operations, and I asked them to put a presentation together in terms of where we were putting mags and how all of this was laying out. And when they laid it out, they had captured a big part of this plaza to be part of the secure perimeter. And I said, that was never in my vision, and to be honest with you, I was a bit taken aback. And we're all like that. If we hone in and we start to own some viewpoint, then we start to close off the opportunity to think beyond it. Right. So in this case, they came right back, and they were prepared with the science. Everybody here is sick, and most of you probably have heard me say science trumps emotion. So they came back with the science. They laid out their plan. And I said, let me noodle on this, right? And I came back to them the next morning and said, this is so much better than anything that I envisioned, right? I had just sort of checked a box for convenience, and yet they had taken the time to collaborate with each other and to make sure that they had their argument fashioned with the proper science to say, this is going to be better for our organization. This is going to be better for our employees. It's going to be better for our guests overall. And guess what? That's what we're doing. Many, many times in my career, I've been in a situation where I've had to make a decision, and you don't have the time to socialize. But whenever you get even one opinion, let alone one or two, And to be honest with you, not always don't always go to the people who are going to agree with you, like going to the parent who's going to tell you yes, right? The idea is be open to the idea that how other people look at things is going to be valuable. The last thing I want to talk to you today about is it ties together with some of our early webinars. You know, I was thinking about what are the important points or lessons that I could try to communicate to you. And I had a situation where I had a direct report, and I just felt like that person was fighting me on everything. And I was just like, I don't understand why I'm in this battle. And then I realized something that Richard had kind of taught me, not directly, but as by watching him train and the conversations we've had, that type of thing. And I realized that, listen, if I've got a problem with somebody, then there's a pretty good chance the problem is beginning with me. So I had to step back and say, okay, why am I fighting them? Why is my reaction so visceral to everything they say? And it goes back to, and Victor Cohen, and we're former co-workers, he put on here really early, people seem to listen to reply when they should listen to understand. And I really should whack myself because my title is Chief Listening Officer. And the reason for that is I understand how important it is to listen. And I've been offended in my career when other people talked at me versus with me. And so I'm even more offended when I find the situations where I have done something similar, because we're all human and we all need to be reminded. We all need to make sure that we're doing the things that are going to make us better every day, because as we get better, then we have the opportunity to pass that on or pay it forward, whatever you want to say, to help support and make the people around us better. And so with that realization, you know, kind of worked out that situation to the point where I took time to understand where that individual was coming from. What were their motivating factors? What were their criteria for decision making? And in doing so, I learned to value their contribution to the discussion. Because every time we close a door, we limit opportunity. We limit economic opportunity. We limit social opportunity. We limit opportunity to growth. We limit everything. So my final message to you, because Richard wants me to be on time before a Q&A, is it's okay every once in a while to realize that you might be going down that road. But when you recognize it, put the brakes on, stop, take a breath, and reopen the doors that are going to make you better on behalf of your organization. Richard, I'll put it back to you.
Thanks, Russ. Put this back up on the screen here. Oops, let's go back there. There we go. So thanks to all of our panelists, to Antony, Adina, and you, Russ, and to all of you who have joined. I also want to take just a moment. I've missed this a couple of prior webinars, but typically we've gotten it. We've had a great partnership with the International Association of Venue Managers while this is a VSG-AT series of webinars. There's been great support there, and also from the VMA, two fantastic and actually partnering organizations that support, as all of you know, and many of you are members, what we're doing, and have really been on the forefront. Especially thanks today and the way this opportunity has been presented to us to talk about a topic that often gets pushed aside or ignored. So, you know, the three things I heard, and then we want to open it up to questions. I heard a lot, but the three things I wanted to come back to was this concept of collective approach, and I heard that throughout AB, Adina, and Russ's conversation. This truly is. None of us is as smart as all of us. It's not just a fancy saying. It is when I can step back and involve other people's opinions, my view of the world changes and I get smarter. And unfortunately, after I've heard that, sometimes that becomes my idea instead of being humble enough to accept it. The second thing we've heard from all three of our presenters is listen. You know, not to respond or reply, but to understand, seeking to understand. And Adina, I want to make sure I get this right, but Adina said something, I think it's so true, but I'd never heard this before. You gain trust in drops by building relationships with people and doing the right things, and you lose it in buckets when you don't do the right thing. So, you know, food for thought. So if everybody click your videos back on and come back forward here for our group, we're going to open this up to questions, and please put those on in the chat box, the kind of Q&A, or I say just go to go to the Q&A. The first one I'll throw up here is hey, Greg Flockus is with us, and appreciate you being on. Asking for some key tips on learning to listen better. So open that up to any of the three of you. What would be some things you would suggest to help me be a more effective listener?
You got to be prepared to listen. Like lots of times we're looking at the person. We may even be leaning in, but we're doing other stuff in our minds. It's like, I hope this could get over because I'm rushing to do the other thing. And whatever process a person needs to employ, to take a deep breath for a second and saying, hey, this person has value. I can benefit. We can benefit from what they have to say. And if you're going to take the time to listen, if you're going to listen, take the time to listen and be prepared to. And it may be that you got to come back to it. It may be that there's too much in the way of you actually hearing somebody at that moment in time. That's a level of maturity that I can't tell you that I deliver consistently. All right. So, but it's a level of respect as well. So put yourself in a position to be prepared to hear what the person is saying. That's my advice.
All right. The only thing I would add is, even before that, I think it's important for us to create environments that people want to tell us stuff. That we want to create an environment that people feel comfortable to talk to us. That's the first step. If you can, I agree with Russ 1,000%. And we all have too many distractions now between phones and computers and things in front of us. But I think creating that environment, which is based on who you are as an individual, and allowing people to feel comfortable enough to talk to you, is, in my opinion, one of the first steps.
Yeah, and I would add to that, to what Russ was saying about being prepared to listen. I think be prepared to be present, and that's a practice. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. You have to practice this, and it's and I think you have to find out what calms you. What gets you in a place where you can be present enough to listen whenever the time comes. And that may be exercise, that may be meditation, that may be reading a book, that may be, petting your dog, whatever it is that gets you prepared for the day. Because it's not just about, I think, when someone comes to you or you're in a conversation, you need to tune in and be present at that very moment in time. To what Antony says, we have so many different distractions. You have to prepare for the day. And so you have to take even a step back from, the preparation that Russ talks about, and just over globally in your life, think about how you can be present, which I think will help you to be a better listener when you need to listen.
And you just saw this in action. You just saw it in action, because once again, as many times in the past, Adina has helped me say something better.
I want to add as well, and actually building on what all three of you said, particularly you, Adina, with the practice. One of the things that Russ and I have in one of our sessions, and those that know me well know that listening is not my strength. It is about practicing. I mean, I already know what I want to say. I'm guilty of this. And, I miss really important things sometimes, and I have to take a step back. So we do this exercise. And if you haven't ever done it, you should try this. An active listening exercise where you literally share a simple story with somebody, but the person on the other side is instructed that they should only listen at 50%. And you know the drill, because a lot of us do that anyway. So while you're trying to tell them this story, they're looking at you and they look down at their phone, or they're looking over the shoulder. And at some point you're going why am I even talking to this idiot? And then the practice part that Adina's sharing with us is it's intentional. And I'm making eye contact without being goofy. I'm giving good body language, but I'm focusing much more, not on the theatrics, but on the words you're saying and what are you trying to share with me? And what happens with the person that's speaking is they become engaged and excited, and they're happy that they're being heard. And if nobody listens, nobody's heard. And if you don't hear anything else in this whole spiel, I would tell you, based on my own research and experience, none of us really care as much about being right as we care about being heard, because we're all going to end up compromising once we start listening to each other. So I think that's really brilliant insight from our three panelists. It's really about being an active listener, and it takes practice, and it's exhausting. So let's look at our next question here. We got a bunch coming in.
So Paul Osmond says, for people who are very hands-on type A personalities and find letting go difficult to do, how would you suggest that they learn to put trust in others and in order to learn from them? And, you know, listen, I'm in that group, okay? And for people like us, you almost literally have to step back and decide what you value. Sometimes you learn that the hard way. You learn that because by being so desperate to make a decision, or by being so desperate to be perceived as the person in charge, that you'll offer direction, and that ultimately doesn't turn out not only as well as it could, but perhaps doesn't turn out well at all. So it really is a personal decision about value for me. It's like, what's more important to Richard, what he just said is a perfect example. Is it more important to hear the sound of my own voice, or is it more important that I'm actually putting something substantive and responsible on the table? And if you're focused on responsibility, value and responsibility to the organization, and wanting to be correct versus wanting to be right, then that's something you have to work on teaching yourself to do. But none of what we're talking about, you can't just check a box and say, okay, now I'm doing this tomorrow because I heard this webinar yesterday. It has to do with really some introspection. It has to do with saying, hey, am I guilty of some of the things that we talked about? Yeah. Do I want to do something about that? Right? And if I do, what can I do? Well, it's also like eating an elephant. It's one bite at a time. You're not going to go from 1 to 100 miles an hour. But you got to start with a value proposition. If it's important to you, if it's important for you to be better, if it's important for you to represent your organization better, then like any journey, the first step is hardest. Start to be better. Recognize your own immediate reactions, tamp them down, and then ask the next engaging question. Share more information. Get help.
So we have a question from across the pond here. Ray Sabin is asking, basically, look, when we think about, none of us is as smart as all of us. Let's say that we got it, but we're working in an organization and we're not the boss. So it's not top-down driven. How do we live that out? Maybe AB, give us your insight on that.
Look, I've learned over the last 10 years I've been here that it's important for me to control the things that I can control, and not worry so much about things that I can't. And in situations like this, I think you got to control the environment that you control, whether it be your specific team, your family, your home life. That's where you can start the process, trying to obviously you continue to try to influence up, but as you get into situations like this, I think attacking them and then dealing with them within the environment that you control is the way that I believe we can effectively make change. Because if I do that, and Adina does that, and you do that, and if Russ does that, then we're now all collectively changing it. Because if there's one person in an organization who's talking like this, maybe it gets drowned out. But when you start having the entire organization, even people at lower levels, start speaking to speak, organizations in a lot of cases have to listen. So I think you can influence from the bottom up, as long as you focus on what you control and get your own house in order first, and not try to just change the world in this drastic fashion.
Adina, any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I agree with what Antony says. You absolutely have to start with controlling the controllables. And I think you find also opportunities when you're in conversations or meetings or what have you with leadership to offer suggestions. I mean, we're oftentimes in those scenarios where you can offer a suggestion that does, I think, give a gentle nudge to leaders to involve more people. Maybe suggest, an ad hoc committee or a task force, or maybe we should involve or ask so-and-so. I mean, it doesn't have to be big, depending on the situation. It could just be about opening up the lines of communication, and that can be through just a simple suggestion.
All right, if I could just add one thing I just thought about was we may not be in the room, or we may know somebody who is in the room, or we know somebody who knows somebody who's in the room, right? So trying to influence that person, ultimately get to the people who are making the decision. I think, again, I think we downplay our ability to influence even from the side with others. So that would be the only thing I would add.
Thank you, AB. I want to, one of our participants has there's many, but Mike Rock threw a great concept out just to share with everybody as listening. He says, to guard against jumping on the first pause, somebody's talking, they pause, you jump in with your response. He said, like, or make your comment. If you've got a question or a comment, basically he's encouraging, like, take a deep breath and keep listening. You can write that down, make a note, you can come back to it later, but continue to pause. And I think that the science says that oftentimes when somebody's speaking, if you wait, they will start and continue to speak and they will feel more heard. And I'd add one other follow-up earlier that others may want to jump on. Michael Rogers was talking about in terms of COVID-19 world. Do we have any tips on overcoming the difficulties with listening without the physical presence? And AB or Adina or Russ may have some other suggestions, but because we do a lot of research on this, one thing we know is when we parrot back what somebody says, it helps us recall it and it helps them know we heard it. So while I might be able to be physically there with you, if you're sharing something with me that's important, whether it's from a technology perspective on email, which is more challenging, or a little better is to be able to do it on voice or video. Physical is always the best, but it's to parrot it back. So Russ, if I understand what you're saying, you'd appreciate it if I could be calling it 8 instead of 8:15, that, whatever the reason is. So Russ now knows I've heard what he has to say. So I think that the most important thing is to genuinely listen and then to tell the person you're listening by sharing back with them key pieces of information so they know you understood it. I don't know, AB, Adina, or Russ, if you have anything you want to add to that, or we'll move on to another question.
Good.
Okay. This is similar to an earlier question, but how do you approach upper management in assisting them with the hiring process when the approach is basically, I'm always right, just hire them? Some of these folks enjoy an audience who will listen. How do we reach out and make the collective approach that several of you spoke of earlier?
That's hard.
Yeah.
That's a hard one. I would say. I mean, because I think that you have to already be, I think, open to and honest with yourself enough to, as a leader, to be a part of this club of none of us as smart as all of us. But I think I don't think you let that keep you from making the suggestion and making the case that you probably are going to get a better fit for the organization. If you do, you may even have some examples of how potentially it would have gone a different way if you had involved maybe someone in the department or someone or other people, or speak to the strengths or the influence that other people within the organization may have, and why it would be positive and beneficial to involve them in the process.
If you keep running your head into a wall, the definition of insanity, right? Which is expecting a different outcome. But I would say step back and start thinking about who influences the decision makers. There's people at the top tier of an organization, but I don't know if anybody knows this, but I actually, there's some HR people I actually like, and how can you build relationships at various strata or levels in an organization that where you can actually, your opinion can be heard, and where it can be where you have an opportunity to actually maybe indirectly influence what's going on. Antony said something that resonates with me, and I've seen this in him because I know him well, but there's been times when I think it's probably been frustrating in all of our careers where the folks on top, we just didn't really feel like they were hearing us. in those times, it's more important for us to be consistent in what we do and how we do it and how we fashion our institutional reputation within the organization. Are we someone who can be counted on? Are we somebody who can be trusted? Is our opinion valued? Because if you can't get there directly, if you can't just go to the higher ups and say, I want you to do this, then what's your strategy to be able to actually, through your actual actions and the institutional reputation and respect people have for you in the organization, to ultimately be someone that people are looked for in terms of bringing those opinions forward and ultimately changing, let's say, the ethos of your organization?
Thanks, Russ. Great question from Robert Jordan on humility, and wow, bingo. The need for humility seems paramount. And he's asking the three of you, when in your career did the need for humility in your approach become critical? When did you hit your head on that wall so many times that you realized you were being insane and it was time to do it another way?
For me, it was my first day as a student internship. And when I walked into Sydney Greenblatt's office and sat down, and she said, "Where's your pencil and paper?" And I said, I can remember. I'm smart, right? And she looked at me and said, "Son, I don't care how smart you think you are, but you're not smart enough for me to trust that you're not going to make a mistake. So you'll never walk in this office again without a pencil and paper." I bring one to her house now.
How about you, Adina?
I think going back to, I think there was a question earlier about like a type A personality and how do you, learn to let go. I think that I learned that, because to me, in that letting go is in the very act of surrendering, if you will, there is humility in that. And I think I learned that when I was working at the American Airlines Center in Dallas, and we were opening that building, and I was completely overwhelmed and outside of my ability to perform. It was so overwhelming. And I think you get to a point where you realize, you know what, I have to surrender. I have to let go. I have to lean on. I have to involve others. I have to do that. And it's in that point where you become humble. You become humble to your team, humble to the process. And you do it out of survival in many cases. Because if you want to survive, if you want to continue to thrive, if you want to continue to grow, it's in that moment that you realize you have to do it in order to succeed and move forward. And it actually is relieving. You feel relief in doing that. So that was my moment of recognizing that, I needed to humble myself and open up and surrender and allow other people to be a part of the process in order to survive.
Great, thanks. How about you, AB?
I would say that I believe that life humbles you, right? I mean, life is always going to humble you, regardless of who you are. We see it all the time. For me, my life, both personally and professionally, are not separated. They're the same thing for me. Who I am is who I am. And so life has humbled me in a lot of ways, personally, but I think from a professional standpoint, whether I did it consciously or subconsciously, I surrounded myself with people who take great pride and joy in humbling me every single day. Some of them are on this webinar right now. Every night I go to bed and I refuel my ego, and every morning it gets completely humbled again by the people around me, and I think that's good. I think it's a positive thing. I appreciate it, and I love the fact that I've allowed that to be part of my existence day to day. So for me, it's an ongoing re-humbling, and I think it's because of the people I surround myself with, both personally and professionally.
Yeah,
Hey, Richard, I'd like to add one more thing.
All right.
I think also as you get more and more responsibility in an organization, you naturally realize that your job is also to prepare the people who are going to follow you. And the way to prepare those people isn't just to keep them in the dark until they get their next opportunity, but it is to expose them and to include them and to ask their opinions and to, it's agriculture. It's how are you going to grow those folks into contributing to the enterprise in a larger way. And literally, I'm not going to say it's maturity, because some on this call would question my level of maturity, but I would say it has to do with experience and perhaps a small modicum of age, to realize that you have a responsibility to others, to younger people who are working hard to try to be the best they can and to grow in an organization. And they can't grow if you're not actually, if you're not cultivating that, if you're not asking for their opinions and what they think, and being in a position to actually value that and incorporate that into the direction and the decisions you make going forward. That's how real organizations get better.
Yeah, that's a great ad. Thanks for that, Russ. Last question we have on the list, and it's off of something you said earlier, Anthony, around the concept of inherent bias. The question really evolves around, as a group, and I'll throw this to the three of you, how can we get people in general, and ourselves especially, to better understand these inherent bias that we're taking to the party?
I guess I'll start by saying, again, for me, it comes back to the people around me, that I've created an environment where people call me out when I'm wrong, or if I'm going down a path about making a decision based on someone's look or gender or race or whatever, that the people around me are confident enough to say, hey, what are you doing? Because again, I think a lot of what we do is subconscious, and it's based off of how we grew up and the environment we live in every day. I worry more about it for my children than I do for myself, because their environment is one facet. My environment was very broad. I grew up in New York City and had a lot of cultural and ethical differences around me day to day. They don't. And so how do I make them aware? How do I get them out there to understand that we all bring something to the table, and that, again, our diversity is what makes us strong, not what makes us weak. So for me, again, it comes down to the people around me.
I think you have to be willing to be uncomfortable, and not just in conversation, but I think in soul searching. And I think you have to be willing to do the work yourself. And what I mean by that is not to be depending on Black and brown people to educate you about what the problems are and what their experiences have been. Yes, it's okay to, I think, get involved in conversation, ask people, your friends, etc., questions to get clarification, just to get insight, all of that. Never stop doing that, because I think that's a part of communication. But there's a lot of the work that has to be done on your own to really, I think, combat inherent bias. And I think that you have to be willing to be uncomfortable and be honest with yourself when you're looking in the mirror and asking yourselves those key questions about how you look at people who don't look like you or don't love who you love. So I think that's a start.
Thanks, Adina. Russ, final.
Yeah, for me, it's unfortunate that, that it takes circumstances like we find ourselves in today, the unfortunate circumstances. But as this is going on, I find myself asking myself the question, do I contribute to this? Am I sort of being the best person I can be? Am I thinking about this in a way that that hopefully inspires and leads others to a solution? And I worry that getting caught up in the day-to-day minutia of all the things that we do, that I sometimes lose sight of that. And I mean, it would be soul crushing in asking myself that question if the answer is that I contribute to that. But the truth is, because I'm not aware of it all the time, that in some ways I probably am. So it shouldn't take the situation that's going on now for us to be reminded of our responsibilities to each other. I do try to work on that sort of every day. I am less reactionary. I am more thinking about how to do things better, how to be a better person. And by the way, I'm sorry to tell everybody, I'm older than all y'all, most of you, but you're never done. There's always a new thing to learn. There's always a new thing to reassess and reevaluate in terms of what you do and how you do it. But I think we all have to just be conscious and aware that we can never be lazy about this. We can never allow a lack of respect for anybody or anything to go forward unquestioned and unchallenged.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. It was great to have you. Hopefully you've got some takeaways from some of the great insights that we've received from our panelists. This will be up on our YouTube channel, the VSG-AT YouTube channel this evening. And so if you have somebody you want to make sure you share it with or that missed it, feel free. And all of the other prior webinars are there as well. Russ and I will be talking soon about potential next steps for future webinars. We'd appreciate your feedback on topics or ideas or insights as well. But again, Adina, Antony, Russ, thank you so much for your time and commitment and effort and great wisdom on this. And to everyone, listen carefully out there. Let's make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.